Thank you very much. Good afternoon for most of you, and good morning to all of the attendees from the West Coast. This is Rick Klein. I'm with Perficient. I'm an Alliance Director. I'm your moderator for today, and I'm very happy to have you in attendance for building and deploying applications on OpenShift with AWS. This is a very interesting topic and one that's receiving a lot of industry attention, modernizing applications, specifically containerizing them and putting them on a platform like AWS with OpenShift. And it's a very timely discussion as we go forward in modernizing applications and moving things to the cloud. So thank you all for coming. I wanted to make sure you knew that this was being recorded. We will be sending out an email in a couple days with a link so that you can see the presentation and get the recording as well. So that will be coming shortly. Also, if you would like to ask a question, we'll be trying to answer those at the end of the session. There is a question window that you can enter questions into as you go, and you'll also be able to do that at the end of the presentations. So thank you very much for attending today. I hope you all get a great deal out of this. It's again, a topic that we've seen a lot of interest in and wanted to make sure that our clients, IDCs, Red Hat's clients, and AWS clients all got the information in a timely fashion. So with that, I'd like to introduce our first speaker. If you could turn the slide. We have two speakers today, Gary Chen, who's a research director from IDC, and Victor Walters, who's a strategist for Perficient. They'll each be talking about how this works and what the essentials of it are. So right now I'd like to turn it over to Gary, and Gary, take it away.
Thanks, Rick. So I'm Gary Chen. I'm a research director at IDC, and I cover software-defined compute, which includes virtualization, container, and cloud infrastructure platforms. And I'm here to talk to you about containers. We're going to start off with going over some enterprise adoption trends from IDC research on container adoption. And then we're going to dive specifically into a study that we did on OpenShift on AWS, where we talked to a number of customers and built a model to quantify the benefits of using OpenShift on AWS. Next slide. So overall enterprise container growth, from a high level, this is a really good way to get a picture of like what's happening in the industry. So this looks at all of the installed enterprise compute in the world today. And you can see most of it is VMs. It's in this dark bluish color, and bare metal in the red. Obviously, it's been trending downward as things become more and more virtualized. And that top area that you see in the light gray, which is kind of hard to see against a white background, but that is containers. So containers can run on bare metal or VMs, and that view isn't shown here, but this is what the primary vessel is for that application. And so start off pretty small, and today, we're probably at around 5% of total enterprise compute is containers. There's still a quarter left in the year. And certainly kind of COVID has kind of gummed things up a little bit. But I think we'll probably get to around 5%. But looking kind of into the future, you look at 2023, it's going to be over 20%. So that's really, really good growth. But it's really going to be a long transition for most people. And when you look at the growth, on average, when you look at the 5-year compound growth rate, container instances are doubling year after year. So there's massive excitement about this technology, a lot of use cases, and it is growing. Next slide.
No.
So looking at, what are the top drivers for enterprises to deploy containers? So we see a couple of different areas. One, these really kind of modern workloads and modern apps. Specifically AI and ML has really risen recently, and that's really due to the kind of this dynamic, scalable nature of those workloads. We also see that edge and IoT is starting to rise up. And containers are a really nice lightweight infrastructure. It's distributed, it's automated, and so that really fits in well with IoT. And then some of the other things that I think are more commonly known as a benefit of containers is really around just basically delivering software faster. And that comes with kind of higher developer productivity, where they can spend less time messing around with infrastructure and shipping code, and just more time actually coding. And then on the ops side, it's really around kind of increase operational efficiency and more automation, and all these faster workflows and more apps going out the door. Um, and then the other part of it is really around, kind of modernization and migration. So taking these existing applications, and while it would be nice for all enterprises to be able to develop everything greenfield with modern technology, that's really not the reality. So they're really taking a lot of existing applications and starting to modernize them for their digital transformation, and a lot of that is also migration to the cloud. And while containers is a great technology and it's very standardized, with the container images and Kubernetes, it can really help with migration. Containers are not a cure-all for all kind of cloud migration issues, but it is a great tool, and it really helps. And at the top there, you see improved security. And this is one I think that a lot of people don't guess right away. So in our conversations with customers, containers can also help a lot with security in a variety of different ways. So one, with containers, there's a container registry. So it's basically a catalog of everything. All of your images are centralized. And it's a great way to know like what is deployed and what the version of everything is. So one, you just get a better assessment of what your assets are. And then usually two, containers are used generally with VMs. So containers are in VMs. So that's another layer of isolation. So if someone wanted to break out of a container, compromise a host, one, they would have to break out of the container, and then they would have to break out of the VM. So it's kind of dual layers of security, and it can be very effective. And then the other parts of it is a more around kind of as people start migrating to more modern infrastructures and modern methodologies. So one, moving to microservices, people report it's really a lot better for security, because when you had a monolith, you really only had one security posture, right? So you had this large thing that you had to defend against. And now with microservices, it breaks it up. So now you can concentrate on what are the parts that are really that I really need to focus on, and what other areas perhaps less so. You can have kind of more granular security postures versus a monolith. And then with CI/CD, which is not necessarily a container technology, but it's often hooked up to container systems, this really lets people update and patch faster. So if they really have to react to an incident or a flaw or an update, they can do that much faster. And the other part with containers is this idea of immutable infrastructure, where out of the container registry, if you need to update something or roll out a new version, it's really kill off the old version and deploy the new one, instead of going into an existing thing and changing the configuration. So this solves a lot of the historical issues around configuration, misconfigurations, and configuration drift. So containers can help a lot in those various aspects, and those are the most common ones that customers tell us that they're using to improve security. Next slide. So if we look at the flip side, what are the top container challenges that people are encountering? So it's interesting. Security is the most common benefit, but also the top container challenge. And really, this is because it is a new technology. So there is a lot of lack of experience, there's a lack of knowledge, and kind of a lack of best practices. So people don't really know what they need to do. They know that it's something new and they have to secure it, but they're not really sure exactly the best way to go about it. And the container systems can be very large when you look at it from securing the entire pipeline from when the container image is first created all the way to runtime. So it's a lot of area to cover, and that's a challenge. And the second part has really been data management. So we see emergence of these new apps, like AI and ML that we see is very popular, and these things are generating data. And so we see more and more stateful apps being run on containers. And so then you have to protect and govern this data, from a container point of view. Um, and then the next challenge is really kind of this idea of containers is, it's becoming kind of this universal plumbing across data centers and clouds. So, you don't have most people have containers running in data centers, and they also have it running in public clouds, and kind of having this unified control plane and unified management and visibility into all of that without creating separate silos has been a challenge. Excellent. And if we look at how where containers are deployed, so this is a slide looking at container instances and where do they live. And so the on-prem is the orange and the gray, which is split between private cloud and more like traditional bare metal or server virtualization. And blue is the public cloud. And so what we see here is that containers are really a hybrid technology. So they really started in the public cloud because it was very kind of linked to cloud native development. And then, as it became more mainstream, we saw on-prem really starting to grow. And so now it's across all those environments. It's truly hybrid. And it has a particular affinity with the public cloud. So public cloud is a larger percentage of containers than any other kind of infrastructure, like when you look at like VMs. So there's definitely an affinity with cloud native development and modern apps. So public cloud is a major factor when you look at container deployments today. Excellent. Then when we look at, what are the workloads that are being containerized? So obviously there's a lot of excitement around these new microservices and cloud native apps. But in enterprise, the reality is that there are existing applications that have to be dealt with. And so we see a lot of containerization of existing apps, and there's a pretty even mix, very slightly tilted towards existing applications. Um, but people still get a lot of benefit from containerizing these legacy apps. It can lead to better utilization, higher density. It is just a much more modern workflow. It's easier to distribute software packages and test them. And even all the new applications, they are not all necessarily cloud native. There's a lot of significant overhead today to implement microservices. There's really a lack of skills of people that know how to build that. So that is something that's going to take a long time for people to transition into. Next slide. So when we look at taking an existing application and containerizing it, this looks at kind of the process, and there's definitely a range, right? Because you got simple apps and you have more complex apps. So when we asked customers to sort them into, what was the level of effort and modifications that required to containerize the application. So about a quarter of them required significant modifications. And then 37% was moderate, and 40% was little to no modifications. And this translates into migration time, which you see on the right. So when you see about 27% of apps that are more complex apps, usually take 3 months or more, with 12% of them exceeding 6 months. And some of the more moderate and simple apps, people can do them in a week. So about 22% of them, they get done in less than a week, while the vast majority, about 45% or so, kind of fall in that couple months category. But this really is very, very workload dependent, and people also get better at it, especially for identifying what apps are good containerization candidates and what the process is as they gain experience. Next slide. And so, a lot of the containerization is just around initially getting the app into the container. But there is a much longer um, uh, project, usually around refactoring these applications. And so right now, it's almost half of all applications that are containerized are then going to go, refactoring And this is often over a long period of time. It could be years. And so this number has actually gone down since kind of the early days of containers. And I think it would really be that users are now more realistic of what can be refactored into what level. And typically with new technologies, I think people are often very optimistic about it. And so they've definitely gotten more realistic. And I think a lot of the process is really about kind of targeting what parts of the app that you really want to modernize. So usually with monolithic apps, people may keep like a static kind of monolithic core, which has kind of a very slow rate of change. And there's not that much development going off. And what they'll do is they'll carve off the faster changing parts that need to be to be modernized, and that there's a lot of fast active development going on, and they will refactor those. And so you kind of end up with kind of a Frankenstein app of some legacy and some of the more modern parts. And this is often in conjunction with a migration to public cloud. So the refactor, and at the same time, once it's refactored, those pieces will then move to the public cloud. Excellent. So now we're going to get into the IDC business value study. So we interviewed 8 customers who are using OpenShift on AWS, and we quantify the benefits that they achieve across a variety of different areas, from developers all the way to infrastructure. And so the full paper will be made available after the event. It has a much more in-depth dive on all the numbers, so you can peruse at your leisure. So there's no need to take furious notes on, on any of these numbers. Next slide. So overall, the summation in terms of average annual benefits per organization was almost $11 million. And we sorted these into 4 basic buckets. So one, the largest area is business productivity benefits. So this is kind of higher revenue from basically more functional software and faster apps and services being able to be rolled out, as well as higher employee productivity from people using those. And then the second part is IT staff productivity. So this is just around more efficient operations and management, from the Kubernetes platform and from public cloud. And it's much more automated, software defined, and API driven, and it makes their lives, much easier. And then the third area of benefit is really around risk mitigation. So this is really around less downtime and more user productivity, just by having more resilient infrastructure and more scalable infrastructure, so the app is available regardless of load. And then finally, the last area, and it looks very small here, but more than half, $600 some thousand is nothing to sneeze at, is really around IT infrastructure cost reductions around the cost of the actual platform itself. Next slide. So looking a little deeper into some of these metrics. So as we look at kind of the effect on application development, and we really looked at the time required to deploy new compute and storage for a developer that's asking for it. So there's a reduction in absolute time, as well as a reduction in the staff time required. And so this is really done, in the cloud and with containers. It's really in a modern API-driven way, often with infrastructure as a code. So the whole automated process really takes less IT staff time and involvement, to service those requests, and developers get the resources that they want faster, so they can get to work coding. So this looks at both kind of provisioning the underlying cloud infrastructure, which could be storage and VMs, as well as the more user-facing side of getting a container or getting a cluster stood up. Next slide. And then increasing developer productivity. So we saw almost a 24% higher productivity with OpenShift on AWS. And this really is around, basically letting developers focus more on code, and letting the infrastructure be less of an obstacle. And so they have faster development life cycles due to the containers and Kubernetes having really modern tools and a modern workflow. And the other part of it as well is that with OpenShift on AWS, they are able to access AWS services from the OpenShift environment. So as a developer, you can access a lot of these services that can help develop applications much faster. So you can get like a managed database, you can get access to GPUs or AI as a service and blockchain as a service. So you get a lot of that componentry that can help you build an app much faster than if you had to create all those elements yourself. Next slide. And so this slide really looks at the reduction and cost and shifting that. So when we look at the cost of the platform, which is the hardware and the software, we found that was reduced, and that savings was then able to be reinvested into developer staff, so hiring more people. So they were overall able to shift 10% of the overall budget, away from the platform and into developer staff. And so this really increases the software velocity even faster. So you got more people that you're able to hire, and these people are also more productive in the environment. So that really accelerates the software development even further. Next slide. And so this looks at overall kind of 5-year IT infrastructure costs. And we found that it was 54% lower costs on average. And the cost savings across the cost of the infrastructure and platform itself, the IT staff time required to manage it, and the cost of downtime and the lost user productivity that comes from that. Next slide. So in summary, we found, there's a 5-year ROI of 661% with 5 months to pay back. And some of the other interesting metrics, so we found that people were able to double the number of new applications per year that they're able to roll out. So that lets the business, innovate, get into new markets, expand into new geographies. And ultimately, that turns into higher business revenue for the organization. So we found that it was almost $33 million higher revenue on average per organization by moving to OpenShift on AWS. And again, all of these, the full results of the study will be available as a paper that you can look at later. And I will be around after the event for Q&A, and I'll be happy to take any questions. And with that, thank you for your time, and turn it back to Rick.
Gary, thank you very much. That was the data itself is fascinating, and I look forward to reading the paper myself. So thank you very much. Just a few minutes on Perficient. Obviously, we're working directly with IDC, with AWS and Red Hat to bring you this information, but thought it would be good for those in attendance to know a little bit more about Perficient. So if you could go to the next slide. Perficient is actually a publicly traded company. We're about $570 million in revenue now. Hope to get to a little over 600 this year. We do have 25 locations around the globe. 22 of those are in North America. So we pretty much cover all of North America in terms of the major cities. We were founded in 97, became public in 98, and we have a little over 4,500 employees. So our colleagues, on behalf of our colleagues, and behalf of the Perficient itself, thank you very much for attending, but wanted you to know that we're there in most of the cities that you happen to be in. So we have offices just about everywhere, and employees pretty much across North America. Some people in China, India, Colombia, London, a few other locations as well. So next chart. We are a global delivery type of company. Most of our locations are in North America, but we look at things a little differently. We want to make sure that we're offering you the right skills at the right places, but also at the right cost. And so we have a global delivery organization. We have people who are offshore, nearshore, onshore, and we manage all of our client engagements here in North America, but we do have locations across the globe so that you get the best of all worlds. Next chart. If you could change chart, please. Oh, sorry. We do have a long-standing relationship with Red Hat, and we've been working with AWS as well for quite a while. We have over 15 years combined experience with the two. We do have a very large Red Hat and AWS practice and quite a few deployments in place already, so over 100 OpenShift on AWS deployments. We have a lot of experience doing this. We can make it work for you and your applications as well. We were the 2018 Rising Star for Red Hat just before they were acquired. And we have solution expertise across different cloud platforms, multi-cloud services. We have a practice that does app modernization and migration. We have a practice that works on microservices and containers as well. So a lot of experience working with Red Hat and containerization, a lot of experience working with AWS. Next chart. Again, this is just really just a statement. The containers really are becoming the de facto standard for deploying and running applications across all the different computing models that exist. It's important to note that this is part of making for a more agile enterprise and a more adaptable one. And given what's going on in the world today, both of those, agility and adaptation, are very important elements to business success. Next chart. At this point in time, I'd like to introduce Victor Walters. He's our Principal Enterprise Strategist. And Victor, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Rick. I appreciate that. Thank you also, Gary, for sharing that information. That will fit in very well with what we're talking about here today. We wanted to just share with you one case study from one of our clients that we were doing container work with. And you will see as I go through some lessons learned and a little background on the actual engagement itself, that a lot of real world facts that have come out of this case study totally support what Gary was sharing and is in perfect alignment. Let's go to the next slide. So this particular company that we were working with is in the shipping logistics industry, and they're global in nature, and they have facilities all across the globe. And they came to us with some very specific questions and concerns, primarily centered around one large monolithic legacy application that had been around for many, many years. And it had kind of, as a lot of applications that are mission critical and stay around for a long time, it had kind of reached this point where they were having some challenges. And then along with that, their business was expanding and growing at a very, very rapid pace. So they were finding it harder and harder to be able to keep up with that demand and meet what the business unit of the company was asking for in terms of making changes and modifications. And so the challenges for them were centered around a variety of different areas in regards to this legacy application. Probably some of the biggest ones that were most important to them was the cost of maintaining this particular application. It had really gotten to be a point that it was the technical debt associated with this one application was fairly large, and it was getting harder and harder to justify continuing spending that money on that. Another probably more important challenge for them was really the lack of ability to roll out new changes and provide some new improvements to this application to keep up with the business demand. This was one of those situations where it just got to be very onerous for them. Could barely get 2 upgrades a year rolled out, and they needed a lot more of that to go with it. And then, a variety of other kind of common types of issues that we see with these applications that have been around for a little bit longer time that they wanted to address specifically on this app. Next slide. So they came to Perficient. We have worked with them for many other projects, and said, hey, here's the challenge. Here's what we think we need to do. Here's the requested solutions, the things that they were looking for and that they wanted to get to, and kind of the top of the requirements. The most important one was the ability to make changes and deploy those changes on this application in a timely manner. Again, they were at best trying to get 2 a year right now, given the current architecture, current design, and everything that existed. They were just really could not live with that any longer from a business perspective. And then obviously, as mentioned before, they wanted to reduce cost was a big issue from that perspective and bring the cost down. But then another one that became pretty obvious, and they didn't call it out very dramatically at the front end, but it became a very big issue as we talked about it more and discussed what they really needed to do, and that was automation. They had done pockets of automation in different areas and different parts of their IT team across the globe, but had not really centralized and honed in on some particular tools and some particular standards and how they were going to do automate and how much automation were they going to do. And so they were still on this particular application, the team supporting it, we're primarily doing everything manually. And so that was adding to the additional cost and adding to the additional slowdown. So there was a need to definitely ramp up the automation in quite a bit. And then, combined with the notion that it was taking a long time to get things done, changes made and get them rolled out, this ties in very directly to what Gary has said in his slide on top drivers. They needed to modernize this application, and they needed to increase developer productivity or increase the number of new releases they could put out the door to get additional features and functions out to their clients as they were demanding it. So it was a lot of kind of common things that we see in a lot of clients in terms of when they come to us and we're talking about existing applications and modernizing existing applications. And so we began to talk about exactly how they wanted to accomplish this and which way they wanted to accomplish. And that led us to moving into recommendations. Let's go to the next slide. So in the recommendations that came down, one of the recommendations that we made right away was the movement to cloud infrastructure. And this organization has a kind of a mindset kind of overall that they had been avoiding cloud, not utilizing cloud in any significant manner. It's kind of the usual way of moving into cloud for large organizations. They'll do a little bit here, a little bit there. And so, that was received with kind of medium, shall we say, reception. We had definitely made a recommendation that they really needed to modernize the application and that they should do that on a container platform. And there was a wide variety of different reasons why we felt like they should do that and why they should move to a container platform. Fortunately, they were already thinking about doing containers, and that was already in their thought process of a possible solution. They were thinking a different container platform than Red Hat OpenShift. And fortunately, we supported both platforms, so we knew the pros and cons of both. And we had a conversation with them. They were still thinking about this and which way to go, and ultimately settled in on Red Hat OpenShift as the direction to go. That was an interesting conversation that there was a couple of things that stood out on this platform that made a difference. And one was automation, the ability to implement automation from very beginning in the process to much deeper into the overall deployment process, all the way from the beginning of development and design, requirement changes, everything all the way through. The platform from Red Hat was going to be a much better support and match to some of their other technologies, and in terms of what their teams were aware of. And this was interesting also from the standpoint that this particular group that we were working with, again, it's a large global organization, so it's not uncommon that one part of the organization is not aware of what another part of the organization is already doing. And so as we moved into the conversations around this container platform, we looked around at some of the other groups we've worked with and pointed out that they already had implemented Red Hat OpenShift and had already had 2 clusters up and running that could be leveraged for this engagement. So again, all of those kind of points really kind of helped bring them to their current decisions. And so we moved forward with a modernization, and we were going to first do a replatforming. This was kind of in Gary's slide where he was talking about it's not just for new apps, it is for existing apps, meaning the container platform. And so we were going to start with refactoring it first, and getting it into the container platform. And not refactoring first, refactoring second, and migrate it to replatform it to the container platform first, and then start doing some of the refactoring after that. That was kind of a really tough one to make a decision on because it is such a large application. And there were some concerns and questions about the ability to replatform without having to do significant rework of the code to make it work. So we did some pilots, did some tests and checks, and validated a few pieces of code, and through those pilots, we're able to determine we would replatform, and then we would move to refactoring the application to be a more modern structure with APIs and microservices and things of that nature. And as you can see, a lot of the decisions came down with different recommendations from where we were, but none of them were really big game changers, and all of them were still kind of up for debate going forward, and which we probably will be making some of those changes as we move forward. So what were some lessons learned that we've learned out of this case study? Let's go to the next slide. We really started analyzing, looking at this, and as we kind of have in our process from Perficient in our delivery process, we especially when we're doing Agile type of development work and delivery work, we iterate through and double check and make sure that we're making progress, we're moving where we need to be, and things are coming along the way we expect it to be. But we also are looking at lessons learned. What do we learn out of the last sprints that we've done, and really aren't, trying to figure that out and put that together. As we examined that for this particular client in the process, the lessons kind of broke themselves out into two natural categories: business lessons that were learned, and then technology lessons that were learned, technology / quote unquote technical lessons that we learned. So we thought we would just share a little of both of those today. And again, this is a modernization of a large app on container platforms. So a lot of these lessons are specific to containers, but then some of them may be even broader than that. But again, you'll begin to get a flavor and begin to understand a little bit to what, if you aren't in the container world and working in the container world, some things that you might look for and watch for. Let's go to the next slide. So some of the business lessons that we learned that were very, very important: count the cost, check the benefit. Sounds like an obvious thing. Obviously, they had already been counting the cost on the current legacy app, and they knew what it was costing them to maintain that and continue to deliver, and potentially, what it might have even been costing them in terms of lost business and not being able to deliver this additional capability. But one of the things they really had not given a lot of thought to, that the approach that we're taking with the container platform is starting to bear fruit on, was the notion of delivery timelines. How long it takes to get something out the door and deployed in production in a safe and consistent manner, and fully tested and validated and in compliance with all the regulations that they have to be in compliance with and everything. So they really started seeing the benefit of that within the first several sprints as we began to move forward and begin to replatform the code into the container platform, and really began to see the benefit of what the container could bring to the table. So there was a good opportunity to start reducing costs just in overall time. You remember in Gary's slide, he showed that you would get 10% back in your development time by moving to this type of a platform. And that's in essence where we started seeing that 10% starting to happen, because we're not spending a lot of time going back and forth with the business and rethinking requirements and things of that nature. It was just a very quick turnaround type of process. And the benefit of that is we got a lot tighter connection to the business. So the business folks and the IT folks were talking in a lot more frequent fashion, and they were having very meaningful conversations, and especially when it came down to acceptance testing and those final phases of testing, it made a big difference there. And so it became very apparent that as you evaluate those processes, as I mentioned, in terms of the collaboration with the business folks, that you as the business folks are starting to go through and analyze their business and identifying the new things and new features they need to do, and are generically, on a broader basis, when business units are making decisions about new services or products they want to bring to the table. One of the things that was happening was these business groups were often working independently. and they were independent, maybe just them and the marketing folks, or them and the sales folks, or whatever, and there was not a full inclusion of IT and finance and everybody else in the early stages as they're looking at these things. This process has started bringing that more upfront engagement and involvement, and they started sharing right away when they heard that we were going to re-platform, going to have ability to deliver. They started sharing right away a lot of their new ideas about what they need to do and getting those down in writing. And so collaboration really started coming into play, and started making a huge difference, in how they were beginning to move forward, and the attitude about IT began to change. Also, they began to realize that IT really could help them in better defining their future and where they're going to go, in particular with this one application. So it really made a difference in terms of the being able to define a new process for how they begin to create these new services and these new apps going forward. Along the same lines, in terms of collaboration, it was obvious that there were many other stakeholders in the company that had not been consulted about some of these activities, and even were not aware about the replatforming activity to replatform this application. So as we began to talk to those other groups and began to interact with those other groups, we began to get a new set of inputs and began to get a lot more support. As this is an organization that has a typical IT group that's broken up by function. And some of those groups are in different countries and different time zones. So there was all sorts of challenges around those areas. But as word spread and we began to include more people, both in the the daily stand-ups as well as in other design workshops and things of that nature, the collaborative effort together began to gel and come back together in a much more effective way, which is ultimately going to pay big dividends at the end as we move into the refactoring and moving to a more modern structure within the application code itself. And finally, we began to start working with the business folks in verifying what they were seeing from their customers and hearing from the customers in terms of what they wanted to do and what they needed out of this application, because parts of this application was customer facing, but most of it was internal. So a lot of people had not thought that the external customer had a big voice in this, and the more we talked about it, the more they began to realize they actually do have a very large voice in this. So that leads us to the technology lessons. Let's go to the next slide. So in the technology area, we had a few key points that really kind of became very clear. The think before you leap. This one is one that's a difficult one to find a good balance on. But the point of this lesson here was that they had a couple of different groups within the application development group itself, as well as some supporting groups, some infrastructure groups and others, testing and QA and things of that nature, that all had dissenting opinions about which tools you should use, how you should do it, the process you should walk through, things of that nature to actually get this application replatformed and modernized. And so there was a tendency sometimes initially when we were finalizing the recommendations and the structure and the path forward and everything, there was a tendency to just kind of say, okay, well, that group said we should use that tool, so then we should use that tool. And there was no real consideration about, what are the impacts of using that tool, what would happen, what are the ripple effects, things like that. Now, there's no silver bullets. I mean, any of us who've been in technology and the information world for any length of time recognize that there's no single platform or tool that's going to solve all problems. So you're always going to have this kind of multiplicity of things you're working with. But you need to really think about it before you make that decision and think about it. And that doesn't mean that you shouldn't possibly try new tools and come to some conclusion about whether they're valuable in your particular portfolio, what you're working with. But it does mean that you can't go. You probably should limit that to things that really you clearly see some benefit that's going to come about before you jump into it. The second one here is really thinking about how you go about doing this replatforming and modernization. The use of container technology is really as much a technology platform as much as it is anything else that brings together holistically all of these different components in a whole new way of putting together applications and deploying and testing and validating and maintaining applications. And it really calls for a whole new way of thinking about these applications and beginning to think about these applications as platforms or solutions and not just applications. And what I mean by that is that the code that you're going to deploy on this container and the pods and all of the configuration within your service mesh and all the different parts of this platform are really going to be if you put that together with some other components around it, are really forming a business solution platform that could be actually leveraged to deliver multiple applications as we have thought of applications in times past. So as you're beginning to make this move to the container and you begin to modernize an application to move it onto a container platform or creating a new one for that matter, be sure you're thinking about the architecture of that code, the APIs and microservices in a broader sense as a business solution platform that could actually service a variety of different needs within the company, within the organization, and think about creating really a business solution platform that fits in underneath a digital business platform where you're delivering the actual services and products to your customers. This kind of fits in with the whole, if you think about it, the whole mega stream of what we've seen in terms of trends over the past years. We moved from centralized mainframe computing to mini computers, to microcomputers and nano computing, and then moving into cloud. And so there's this mega trend shifts that are going on. And this is kind of along the same lines. We're having this shift in terms of how we do code and how we create new business solutions. And the container platform is gearing up to be a significant part of that and helping define that path and a way to move forward. And then to continue to be able to leverage what you develop over and over and over again. Third point here is solutions. Really do think about what you're doing in terms of moving things over and how could I, especially when you move into modernization phase, if it's an existing app and you're modernizing it, be sure and think about how could I modernize this in such a way, break it apart, separate it, put it into APIs and microservices in a way that those APIs and microservices could be reused in a different way. And a container platform allows you, a platform like OpenShift gives you tremendous flexibility to be able to do that with the use of your containers and segmenting things within the platform and then the access to the data and especially to quickly build out MVPs, minimal viable products to test out some new service or product offering. So if you do the coding right in terms of modernizing it or even new code, you will find a lot of reusable components there that will make a big difference. And then the container platform allows you to put those back together with automation, thorough automation, end-to-end automation in a way that you probably could not do today with a lot of your applications that you have readily available. Finally, think loose, fully integrated, or think loosely integrated processes. And in times past, I know we've all seen this. We know it's not a standard we should seek to live up to by any means, but we've seen hard-coded connections where we even got hard-coded IDs and passwords for one piece of the solution to talk to another piece of the solution. But we want to get away from any of that kind of stuff and really use a container platform and the power of the service mesh and the whole platform as a way to begin to integrate processes that may run across multiple solutions / applications that you might need to deliver. But then also in particular, be sure that you're tying together your automation correctly and that your automation scripts and your whole pipelines, all your pipelines and everything are designed and built in such a way that they can be easily modified to bring in additional capabilities and deliver additional capabilities for your business. It'll really pay off big time as you move forward. One of the challenges that we run into with almost every client that we work with and engagement we work with is the ability to automate this full process, the governance processes all the way end to end. So let's go to the next slide. So taking it to the next level, and what we mean by this is that what we try to do, especially when clients are moving to a container platform, is a great opportunity to begin to think about patterns. And when you think about patterns, you're thinking about patterns in terms of your architecture, you're thinking about patterns in terms of your network and your physical architecture, over and above your application architecture. You're thinking about patterns of flow, communication flow, traffic, routing, all different kinds of flow in terms of how you're doing what you're doing to actually modernize that app or move it forward. And again, the container platform allows you to establish a pattern in terms of how you do that, and then you can actually leverage that pattern through your CI/CD pipelines to go to the next application, go to the next solution, and deploy it very quickly. Because you'll recognize it right away. You'll, oh yeah, that's a pattern we used on, solution 1, 2, 3. So we can use that one on solution 4, 5, 6 as a starting point. Again, speeding up the process, getting a jump ahead, taking a step ahead, and making something happen. As you think about the patterns, again, automation. Think about automation. One of the reasons for thinking about patterns is you typically have those patterns automated, and then you're able to just go grab the automations and bring them over. Automation, full end-to-end automation. One of the big selling points for going to a container platform, don't forget, is portability, the ability to deploy it in the public cloud, the ability to deploy it on-prem, in a private cloud, to do a hybrid types of deployments. A lot of different flexibility with the container platform. But getting the platform deployed to support the container platform to support your solution, and then deploying your solution into that requires that you have a certain level of automation to make it go as smoothly as possible, to be able to redeploy the application quickly, simply, and easily, and spread it out across multiple different applications. And then, a little bit about the old and new. There's some things that we've always done that we need to continue to do. But what you want to do is those things that that you've always done and need to do, you need to maybe think about it. You need to continue to do it in the same way that you've been doing it. And is there an opportunity to maybe think about it and do it in a different way? And the container platform can bring that to the table for you. And we've seen that with this client. We have been able to automate tremendous amounts of compliancy and testing and risk mitigation on the backside that they did not have automated before, and was consuming and taking a lot of time to get the deployments out into production because those things weren't automated. We were able to automate that, quite a bit of that, and still meet the same requirement that was there before. Let's go to the next slide, which will be the final slide for us, the second. The application modernization journey that Perficient follows is very similar to this. And the only thing that I wish to point out on this particular slide is that there is a pattern, there is a methodology that we follow in these modernization journeys. You won't always have these steps exactly titled the same way that you see here, but you will go through this, and it's an iterative repeat process. You are going to repeat, and you are going to cycle through multiple times to actually get to the modernized application and get it ready for deployment. But there are some key concepts here that I've mentioned previously. You need to think about your collaboration. Think about what you're doing, who you collaborate, and do we have everybody involved it needs to be. You need to think about your research your tools, research which way you're going, why you're going that way. How do you want to modernize? Do you need to go greenfield? Do your research, know what you're doing there. When you get into construction phase, don't be afraid to change the process if you need to. If it's greenfield and you're trying to develop an MVP type of outcome, don't be afraid again to fail quickly and deploy, test, fail. Use the repeat process here to continue to modernize and get your application moving forward. And that is everything from my part. Rick, I'll turn it back to you.
Victor, thank you very much. That was great. Again, if you have questions, please enter them into the question box. We do have a few, and let me see if we can get to a few of those right now. We do have a few minutes left, so I'd like to be able to do that. The first question is actually probably to Gary. What industries or industry segments have been getting the best traction from migrating to containerization in the cloud, and comparing that to other models in similar industry segments?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, so one, I think, containers are going to be a pretty horizontal technology, right? So, I mean, I covered server virtualization during Rise, and while there's certainly, like in the beginning, there's certainly some early adopters and such, but like, the market for virtualization was like anyone who had a server had a server. And with containers, it's pretty much, anyone that wants to develop, faster apps and does software development. And so right now, like the two leading industries are really kind of, the IT, computer software industry. So if you're in the business of making software or providing some kind of internet service, like a Google, they're running, they really have the most experience with containers. Kind of outside of that, getting into more traditional enterprise, we're really seeing financial services be the lead, and they're often the lead on a lot of these new technologies, but they do a lot of kind of AI and simulation and things like that, as well as kind of user-facing, kind of banking apps. And then after that, we really see kind of a whole host of industries coming up. We see manufacturing, we see healthcare, we see retail and telecom as well for containerizing their network functions and 5G. And Edge and IoT. So those, I think, are the most common ones.
Thank you. Thank you. And this next question is actually to both Victor and Gary. Are you seeing an acceleration in modernization projects? And if so, what types are you seeing? On top of that, how does the customer decide what applications to modernize?
I had to think about that a little bit. Go ahead, Gary.
Yeah, I mean, I can start out. So yes, we're definitely seeing acceleration in modernization. It is a big initiative in a lot of companies. I mean, one, I think the current kind of economic and global environment has accelerated a lot of that, right, with the pandemic. So, I think that has accelerated movement to the cloud. It's also kind of accelerated people's immediate demand to accommodate kind of different scenarios. One is obviously kind of the working from home scenario. The other one is just transacting business in a different way, right? So like if things are closed, people are looking to transact business online, or they got to have some kind of like, a retail, like a curbside pickup. And so these are pretty fast shifts that they had to make. They had some of that before, but now it's like at unprecedented kind of scale and demand, and they really got to kind of bulk up those features. So that's kind of like I think some of the immediate things that I've seen, particularly with all the stuff that's happening this year.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I would say definitely from a Perficient perspective, we have seen an acceleration of requests for modernization of applications. And thus we have a group internally that's almost exclusively focused on that, and have a methodology for approaching and the process, the overall high-level process that you saw. The decision making about which applications to modernize is a very tricky one. In a lot of cases, and it's difficult to apply it across a wide range of industries and application types. But I would say that what we're seeing a lot of clients leaning towards is some of their more difficult and larger applications to modernize, only because they embody so much business logic and have so much mission criticality to the company that it's worth them to start this stream of modernization and try to get that application moved to a better state that allows for quicker response and quicker adaptation. So it's an application that represents a pretty significant revenue flow within a company. I think the other kinds of applications we're seeing modernization onto is kind of the other end of the spectrum. They're wanting to get into the container platform. They want to understand it. They want to get better with it. They want their developers to become comfortable with it, and the infrastructure people. So then they take a kind of a low risk application and begin to move forward. So it's kind of two opposite ends of the spectrum we're seeing people select the applications from.
Thank you. We are at the top of the hour, and I want to make sure that we're cognizant of the time. A couple other questions were about the presentations in the recording. Again, this is being recorded, and we will be sending out the presentations to everybody, and make sure that you all get that. So I want to thank you all for attending. We're going to close the recording at this point in time. And again, have a wonderful afternoon, and thank you again.